It is VP Debate Night, and it is going to air right here on KCMO 95.7 FM at 8 p.m. It also happens to be Politics and a Pint Night. We'll see many of you out at the American Legion Post 370 right on 75th Street in Overland Park at 6 p.m. It is going to be an outstanding day, and we appreciate you starting with us here on KCMO 95.7 FM. So tonight, there are implications for this vice presidential debate. We always look back on these things and we say, what do they really mean? Do they matter? Are they for show? Well, oftentimes they can be for show, but there have been moments when they have turned around a campaign. Go back to 2012. The vice presidential debate between Joe Biden and, at the time, Paul Ryan mattered. Joe Biden, when he actually had a functioning brain, cleaned Paul Ryan's clock. Paul Ryan came off like the kid in the candy shop who was in too big of a moment for himself and was trying to play nice guy, and Biden played old school politics and kicked his butt. In 2016, Mike Pence had himself a very good night against the no-name Tim Kaine. Mike Pence was the former talk radio guy who was able to eloquently give a side to the Donald Trump campaign and the Donald Trump candidacy that it needed. Someone who was a calm and steady hand, somebody who could articulate some of the visions of the Trump campaign and the potential Trump administration. And that was a very good moment in 2016 for Mike Pence and Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine. And tonight can mean a lot. Tonight is a moment that you're going to look at and say, it may not be a defining night in this 2024 presidential election, but it will absolutely matter. And it will matter for a couple of reasons. First off, on the Trump side, he can only be there for 4 years if he wins. So basically, you're getting a look at who the successor is. The potential successor is to Donald Trump, MAGA, America First. And it just so happens to be a guy in J.D. Vance who is a writer, who is an incredibly eloquent speaker, and frankly, I believe, who is able to put a vision with words to Donald Trump's movement, arguably in a better way than Donald Trump. Or at least in a way that's a little more sophisticated. And that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And then you have Tim Walz. I almost said Tim Kaine. He was on my mind from 8 years ago, which is probably the last time I want to think about Tim Kaine ever in my life. But Tim Walz tonight gets up there as a guy who nobody really knows. He's the guy who does these goofy moves and, swings his arms around and calls people weird when the weirdo's staring him right in the face in the mirror. That's Tim Walz. And no one really knows the guy. He has not done a lot of interviews. Done a handful of interviews. Half of those have been holding Kamala Harris's hand. And he's going to get up there and try to make the case for Kamala Harris, who people still don't really feel like they know all that well. So from the standpoint of their campaign, tonight matters in a big way because nobody knows the ticket. So for that sliver of the undecided voter who's still trying to figure out what the best way forward is for the American people, well, we're not getting another presidential debate. Barring something unforeseen, we are not getting another presidential debate. So when you only have one presidential debate and then one VP debate, well, guess what? That VP debate is going to matter more than a traditional presidential cycle when you get usually 3 debates. Right? Trump and Hillary had 3. Trump and Biden had 2, but one of them got canceled due to COVID. So that's how you end up with a VP debate that actually has more juice to it because of how this thing has played out the last few weeks, how Kamala Harris came out of nowhere to be the nominee. People are still like, what happened back in July? And no one knows the running mate. Now, with all that being said, I expect J.D. Vance to have himself an excellent night. I see J.D. Vance getting up there and putting not only his written skills and his verbal skills to test, but also you are going to get a guy who has done this far more recently than Tim Walz. J.D. Vance was just on a debate stage 2 years ago when he was running for U.S. Senate. And he ran in Ohio against a guy named Tim Ryan, who was a longtime member of Congress, slick-talking guy who knew the Beltway. And J.D. Vance put him in his place. Here's a great example.
He's raising money for the insurrectionists who were beating up the Capitol Police. The one guy he tried to raise money for got 4 years in prison. This is ridiculous. I'm not taking a back seat to you. I brought $500 million back to fund police in Ohio.
So I've got 3 little kids, including a 2-year-old, and one of the things that's true of toddlers and is also apparently true of career politicians is that they accuse you of doing the very thing that they do themselves all the time. At the height, Tim, of the BLM riots, I've condemned political violence whether it comes from the left or the right. But at the height of the BLM riots, where they were rioting and looting and burning down America's cities, Ohio cities and small towns, Tim Ryan threw the police under the bus. He attacked them as the new Jim Crow, as systemically racist, and he voted for legislation that would have stripped funding from them and redirected it towards litigation defense. This is another example of Tim Ryan talking about what he would like to do. Tim, you don't sound too bad. If you actually tried to do the things you talk about wanting to do, you wouldn't be half bad. The problem is you got 20 years and you failed to do any of it.
There you go. That was J.D. Vance 2 years ago. I could see that very same line being broken out tonight by J.D. Vance. Hey, Tim, why don't you ask your boss why she hasn't done any of the things that you guys are talking about in 3.5 to 4 years now in office as the second most powerful person in the country? Can you please go back on behalf of the American people and ask your boss why nothing has been done? J.D. Vance is a great communicator. J.D. Vance, to me, takes what Donald Trump has brought to the political arena and is able to put a little shine on it, is able to smooth out the edges a little bit, and is able to eloquently deliver that message in a way that we frankly haven't seen. You know, we had like kind of a primary on the Republican side, but as great of a governor as Ron DeSantis is, he's not outstanding in those debates. J.D. Vance is. J.D. Vance will be. And J.D. Vance may have his very own coming out party tonight when it comes to showing himself to be the heir apparent to Donald Trump, John.
I like the way he speaks. He doesn't get excited, right? He doesn't really rush his pace. He just continues on with what he's saying, you know.
His brain is never ahead of his mouth.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And that's something that anybody that speaks publicly needs to realize. Let your brain follow and then your mouth speak. Don't do the, because then you get ahead of yourself.
He's comfortable in the command of the facts that he has, so he doesn't need to.
Exactly. He does not need to do that.
No, you're lying. No, he just continues on, says no. Matter of fact.
He just does his thing. And I think it's going to be fantastic to watch tonight or listen to at 8 p.m. here on KCMO 95.7 FM. What are you expecting tonight? When you sit down on that couch tonight or you tune in, maybe you're driving back from the office, maybe you're working the overnight shift, and you're listening tonight to J.D. Vance debate Tim Walz. What do you want to hear? What are you expecting to hear? Text line 913-408-7957. Pete, you worried about the moderators tonight? I'm not. Nora O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan. No doubt in my mind that they are both going to go with a lot of joy. I put on my air quotes when I say that. And vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz coming up here in a couple of weeks. That's just my hunch. But I'm not worried about them. I'm not. First off, they're not going to fact check in real time. CBS came out and announced that over the weekend, which upset many on the left because Republicans do nothing but lie. Wink, wink, nod, nod. So there were many in social media land who were very upset that CBS came out and announced that Walz and Vance can fact check each other if they so choose, but we are not going to do it for them. And that's the right approach. Because CBS was a joke, the way they only fact checked one side.
I think we've kind of lost sight of what a debate is, right?
Yeah.
The moderators fact check, but they don't call you out right there on the stage. It's for the point of view one. Okay, you're wrong.
Yeah.
That is their job, but they're not there to interject immediately like referees in the NFL.
And that's what they were doing.
Right.
Last time around.
Yeah.
Throwing that yellow flag all over the field. My goodness. Gene Steratore out there, these guys. David Muir, guns out, right? The whole thing. It was ridiculous. So that's not happening. And frankly, J.D. Vance has such a command of the issues and the facts. I could see J.D. Vance fact-checking the moderators in some of the ways they ask questions. That's how good I believe this guy's going to be. Also on the text line, Pete, are you making the expectations too high for J.D. Vance? No, I'm not. I'm not going to lower expectations for a guy who I think is going to get on that stage and kick some serious butt and is more than capable of doing it. I don't lower expectations for people who I have very high expectations of. No way am I doing that, John.
The guy's out there running the gauntlet on the Sunday morning shows, right?
Yes. Look at these numbers. I'm glad you brought that up. So J.D. Vance has done 24 national television interviews since July 21st. At least this is the report from Axios. This was written September 19th. So it's actually 10 days old. But here are the numbers through September 19th. J.D. Vance had done 24 national TV interviews. Tim Walz had done one. Local TV interviews. J.D. Vance, 15. Tim Walz, 3. National print publications. J.D. Vance, 8. Tim Walz, 0. Press conferences. J.D. Vance, 12. Tim Walz, 0. Stack it all up, J.D. Vance has done 59 TV and print interviews. Tim Walz has done 4. The last 2 months has been a sprint to this moment tonight for J.D. Vance. And there is no doubt in my mind he's going to have himself a very good night. I have never been so confident as, at least in my adult lifetime, in a guy having a good debate night on the Republican side of the aisle. That's how confident I am going into this thing tonight for J.D. Vance. Because at least, once again, in my adult lifetime, which basically goes back to John McCain, I always was concerned, just take it through my adult lifetime, right? Going back to that McCain debate or that McCain campaign. McCain was always, going to take a backseat to Barack Obama. Obama was a larger-than-life figure. His VP was Sarah Palin. Say what you want about Sarah Palin, solid conservative, not exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer, and not a great debater. Didn't hurt herself like the media claimed, not a great debater. Fast forward to 2012. Paul Ryan, way in over his head. The old dog Joe Biden took him to the woodshed, treated him like corn pop. Then you fast forward to 16. Mike Pence won that debate in 2016 against Tim Kaine. But I didn't go into it with a ton of confidence. I didn't really know what to expect. 2020, Pence and Kamala, not a lot of memory there outside of the fly on Mike Pence's head. So this one tonight, you go back once again in my voting years as an adult, and this is as confident as I've been going in to one of these things. 913-408-7957. Rob's in Kansas City. First up, Rob, go ahead. You're on KCMO.
Hey, Mundo, how we doing this fine Tuesday morning?
Oh, it's a beautiful morning, my man. I'm feeling good. How are you? What's happening?
I'm alive and kicking. I wanted to talk about the debate coming up tonight, and I want to hear more about policy as far as the vice president's candidates are seeing, and also what they see their president candidate trying to do instead of this finger pointing and blaming and these policy topics. Let's get back to the policies on what's actually going to be done instead of on the left side the word salad and on the right side.
Did you cut out on me there, Rob?
Prefer policy. I have heard very, very little out of any side as far as policy, and that's what I'd like to hear.
Well,
what are you guys going to do?
I like that, Rob, and thank you very much. I am hopeful, like you, that we will get that tonight. I think we're more likely to get that from J.D. Vance. My ideal situation is that J.D. Vance blends the failures of Kamala Harris under Joe Biden with the here's what my boss, Donald Trump, did from 2017 to 2020. And frankly, I think J.D. Vance can better articulate the specific victories and successes under Donald Trump's term better than Donald Trump. Because Trump does the whole hyperbolic, we had the best economy ever, and like, that's great. But Give me something that's a little more like concrete, okay? Why was it the best ever? You know, I've done it once, I'll do it again. Like, all that stuff's fine, good. I trust the guy on the economy. But give the person who's kind of like not fully engaged some numbers to work with. Explain how you saw the largest growth in income, in wages, at the lowest end of the income bracket. Do some of that stuff. And there are numbers there that back that up. We've talked about them on this show. That's what I'd love to see tonight. And then give that vision going forward for how you fix things from the last 3 years. Tim Walz is not going to do that. He can't possibly run on a vision and a record from his boss when she's been in the White House for 3.5 years as the VP. That's going to be much more difficult for them to do. So I'm with you, Rob. I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic, and we'll see how it plays out. Ed in Gladstone. Go ahead, Ed.
Hey, what the most important thing for me, what words or phrases for the drinking game?
Yeah, you know, I got to see if we have a drinking game bingo card out there yet. I'm very interested in that. I'm always a little nervous doing that, though, Ed, because I might not show up for work the next morning. He's gone. All right. He wanted to drop that mic. That's fine.
He's already got his excuse.
I've got to find a drinking game bingo card before the end of the show today. We've got another 3.5 hours. I see one here from USA Today, but it's not all that well done. It's kind of cheesy.
Stay away from the word weird. Don't take shots every time you hear the word weird.
Yeah, something. Tim Walz, he's going to be using that word a lot tonight, isn't he? He's going to do the whole weird thing. Yeah, this guy's weird. Meantime, Tim Walz is the guy who's flipping off fans at the Michigan game. And, you know, did you see the video where he's kind of adjusting his crotch the other day in front of the cameras? I mean, listen, I get it. We're all dudes. But, man, you got to know and pick and choose your spots here, okay? That was unbelievable.
Chris, some bigger pockets.
Yeah.
Where we kind of camouflage.
Something else. He's just going right for the grab. It's like, geez, buddy, easy does it. Unbelievable. So yesterday in Jackson County, they set a tax levy for 2025. It was not a done deal. Needed 5 votes in the legislature to keep the tax levy where it was at. Remember, there was a bipartisan group led by our friend Sean Smith, who is running for Congress against Emanuel Cleaver, to try to roll back that tax levy because of how the taxpayer in Jackson County has been screwed so badly over the last couple of years in particular, right? With these assessments coming in at record high numbers, coming in artificially high. There was a movement led by Sean Smith, but there was also some help on the Democratic side to roll back the levy. Well, after some votes failed yesterday, they needed 5 votes to keep the levy where it was at for the upcoming year. They finally got to that 5-vote threshold. Jackson County legislator Vanessa Husky changed her vote, giving this vote 5 votes to pass, meaning they will keep the tax levy where it's at in Jackson County. That is not a win for the Jackson County taxpayer. The fear-mongering was, of course, in full blast, and it was led by Frank White, the Jackson County executive. And he did the whole thing, oh, boy, I can't even fathom what would have happened if we couldn't pay our first responders and pave the roads and simply do the business of the county. That was the pitch from Frank White and many in the county government. Because that's what it always is. Now, as was noted by Manny Abarca, who is far from a Republican, but I give credit where it's due, even with people I disagree with, apparently you're looking at this thing and you're seeing $90 million in savings that Jackson County has right now. So this notion that they were going to roll back the levy and then suddenly go bankrupt or roll back the levy and, oh, my gosh, we're laying off cops and we're laying off firefighters, please. That's a ridiculous argument, but that's always the argument that any government body makes when you ask to not give them as much of your money or give them less of your money. They come out and they say, whoa, don't you want teachers and cops and firefighters? Yeah, I do. We all do. They're obviously community necessities. But come on, every time you guys try to take more of our money, you can't just claim it's for the cops and the firefighters and the teachers, because we're all wise enough now to know that's not actually the case. And you are spending money on ridiculous and beyond stupid things at local government and at county government levels, and yes, state and federal government levels as well. So as much as there was a concerted effort to try to roll this thing back, unfortunately, the votes were not there because there are too many people at the county level in that legislature who don't care what the taxpayer thinks. And they're not interested in you and your well-being. They just want to play nice with Frank White's office, despite the fact that Frank White is a totally incompetent failure as a county executive. And that is undeniable. He is more interested in coaching first base for the Monarchs than he is being your county executive. Nobody has been held responsible, not a single person has been held responsible for the colossally bad assessment from 2023. And Jackson County residents should never forget that. Nobody has been held responsible. And there are bureaucrats who Frank White employs and hires who he could do something about yesterday or last year, and he has chosen not to do it. Instead, everybody has been protected every step of the way, and the loser has been you. You have gotten hosed as a Jackson County resident. And there have been some people who have been trying to help out, who have been trying to do the right thing on behalf of the voter, on behalf of the taxpayer, but they have not been able to get anywhere. People like Sean Smith. And you hope that they continue to fight the good fight, but I'll tell you right now, with the way the county got this thing done yesterday, they had until today. The deadline was today at 5 p.m. to set that levy. The state deadline to certify the levy is today at 5 p.m. So this had to get done yesterday. And think about this. There are people on your county legislature, if you are a Jackson County resident, who said, you know what? Keep the levy where it's at. Don't roll it back. Don't try to save our taxpayers a couple of bucks in the name of, we don't want to lay off the cops or the firefighters. That's never what this was about. That's never what this story was about. It was about allowing government to continue to stay fat and continue to grow and live high on the hog while you try to just pay your property taxes for another year. While you try to scrape things together and figure out how you're making that payment on a home that you might own outright. But nowadays, owning your home outright, not having a mortgage, when you factor in property taxes, throw in homeowners insurance, doesn't seem like as good of a deal as it did just a few short years ago. And that's where the Jackson County homeowner and the Jackson County taxpayer is at right now. Government jobs continue to grow while the private sector is getting squeezed. We are seeing that federally. We are seeing that locally. You are seeing it in Johnson County, Kansas as well, where they can't even fathom potentially rolling back some of your property taxes in the name of government knows best. That's their attitude. I would argue it might be worse in Johnson County, Kansas than it is over in Jackson County, Missouri right now. But either way, we're splitting hairs. It's bad on both sides on this specific issue. And I hope that Jackson County voters remember this. You know, you're not voting on any of this year, for better or for worse, probably for worse. You're not voting on any of this year when it comes to your legislature, when it comes to your county executive. You had the chance to throw Frank White out of office 2 years ago, and you didn't do it. You had a chance to put somebody in like Teresa Galvin, who was a moderate Republican, who would have been a much better steward of your tax dollars than Frank White and much more engaged with the job, but you chose not to do it. Not you, literally, but I mean the voters at large chose not to do it. So now there's a part of me that says you got to reap what you sow. And that's true for both sides of the state line. But specifically in Jackson County, because that has been such a colossal mess and such a disaster, I look at that one in particular and I say to myself, man, imagine how different things would have been the last 2 years had Frank White not been the county executive. You literally could look at the situation today and say, I'd have more money in my pocket. You've got dozens, if not hundreds of people who are going to lose their lives from the way Hurricane Helene impacted parts of the Southeast. You have Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, And then, of course, Florida as well, but to a lesser degree, just getting absolutely hammered by this hurricane. In many respects, there's a part of this that could end up being worse than Hurricane Katrina. Officials most recently said that in one county in Pennsylvania, Buncombe County in, North Carolina, there are 1,000 residents who remain unaccounted for. Emergency responders are scrambling to locate them. That is in one county. This death toll is going to continue to rise, and it's going to rise, sadly, astronomically. And the rhetoric that you get from some people that has gone viral is just so gross and disturbing. This came from a former University of Kentucky staff member who has since gone viral, reading this out of the New York Post. An unhinged former staffer at the University of Kentucky floated the idea that the death and destruction of Hurricane Helene unleashed on red states was divine retribution for the residents' support of Donald Trump. Betsy Packard, who just looks, and I shared the article yesterday, so you can find it on my X page at Pete Mundo, but she looks like, what's the best way to put it? Hillary Clinton with a disability is probably the best way to put it. Some of you may say that that is redundant, but you get the point. She writes here on X, Hurricane Helene, ... What if God is punishing MAGA populations for their hate and hypocrisy? Works for me! ! She writes. And she doubled down on it, adding on X, hey, if they got hit with an act of God of this magnitude, God must be really pissed off with MAGA. Now, I find this interesting because these people don't believe in God.
Thank you.
The secular left doesn't believe in God. They are their own God, right? You just do what you want to do every single day. You are your own God in the eyes of these people, or the government is your God, one or the other. But now magically, when God existing fits their preferred narrative, like punishing their political opponents, suddenly they're people of faith. It's amazing how that works, right? They don't like God. They don't believe in a God. They don't do anything through the prism of faith or God. But when they can find a reason to use God to punish their political opponents, wow, look at how they roll that out so nicely, John.
Did she offer her take on Israel?
No.
Okay.
Haven't heard that one.
How about that?
Yeah, that's a very good point, though. It's just, it's stunning incompetence. It's gross on so many levels. And it's one of those things that you have to look at and say, boy, I can see right through your hypocrisy here. And by the way, there were plenty of people on, the other side of the aisle who were eating this up and loving it and saying, oh, yeah, that's God. He's punishing MAGA folks down there in, rural North Carolina, South Carolina, Eastern Georgia. I've got a buddy. He's a doctor down at a military base in Eastern Georgia. And he's in Augusta where they play the Masters. And they didn't expect this thing to be nearly as bad as it is. He's expected to be without power for 2 weeks. His family's now in Atlanta. He's back as a military doctor trying to help people out in that part of the state right now because it's just horrific. And nobody thought it was going to be as bad as it's turned out to be. We always think about these hurricanes. It's like, what's it going to mean for Florida? But as Ron DeSantis was saying yesterday, I watched his press conference. He was like, listen, in Florida, at least usually we can access people from the water side, right? We can't get to them from the land side. We can get to them from the water side. You can't do that inland in some of these communities like Asheville and other parts of the Southeast that have just gotten crushed because they're obviously landlocked. And that has made the search and rescue so much more difficult. And you're going to have a situation here where this death toll is going to rise. And a situation like this is not about politics. It's really not. But what you are also seeing here is leadership on display in the Southeast. DeSantis basically right now is acting like the de facto president for the Southeast part of the country. That's what he's doing. You're not getting a lot of help, as far as I can tell, from the feds at this point in time. There was this viral photo of Kamala Harris, I guess on Air Force 2 maybe, where she's like acting like she's on a conference call, but her headphones are not plugged into her phone. She's got the old school, she doesn't even have AirPods. She's got the old school plug in the headphones, the wire headphones to the iPhone, and she's like, on a call, monitoring Hurricane Helene. The headphones aren't plugged in. And she's got a pen in hand with a blank piece of paper. I'm not saying this is going to be George Bush's Katrina because the media won't let that happen. But depending how the next couple of days play out, it could be that way. And think about it. That could have an impact. In some of those southeast swing states like North Carolina and Georgia ahead of 2024. Well, rest in peace to Pete Rose, dying at the age of 83 yesterday. Still not a known cause. He was found by a family member in Clark County, Nevada, where they're going to do a medical examination on what exactly happened to him. No signs of foul play or anything like that, at least according to media reports. Pete Rose, he was at an autograph show in Nashville with some former teammates over the weekend. So it's not like this is something that was expected. It came out of nowhere, but he did die at the age of 83. And Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame, and so should Barry Bonds and all the guys from the steroid era. It is a joke that Major League Baseball and the voters, the holier-than-thou Major League Baseball writers who take themselves way too seriously, have determined who has the moral compass to be in the Hall of Fame. Pitchers were on steroids. Hitters were on steroids in the late 90s. Pete Rose is a shoo-in Hall of Famer, and the fact that he has been punished for this is completely ridiculous. And it goes to show you the pettiness of so-called journalists who get to decide who is the arbiter of morality by leaving a guy like Pete Rose out of the Hall of Fame. But the greatest Pete Rose clip ever came just a few short years ago. When I was working in radio in New York City for the Mike Francesa show on WFAN, which is the number one sports radio station, not just in New York, but it is really the godfather of sports talk radio. It's where sports talk radio began. It has obviously been duplicated by hundreds of radio stations around the country. And I was just doing sports updates, top and bottom of the hour stuff for this show and for the station at the time. I did a little bit of fill-in hosting. But Pete Rose came to the studio once, and he did a sit-down interview in the studio with Mike Francesa. And Pete Rose gave possibly the greatest soundbite I have ever heard in my life about Joe DiMaggio. Of course, one of the great Major League Baseball players of all time for the New York Yankees. I asked John or Mark if they had heard this clip before we went on the air. You guys didn't listen to it during the break now, did you? Okay. Everyone's shaking their head. I'll take you guys at face value here. Here's Pete Rose talking about Joe DiMaggio.
The best way to describe Joe DiMaggio is he was a penis with a man hanging from it.
Now you know a lot more about Joe DiMaggio than you ever needed to. But to me, that is the greatest Pete Rose clip of all time. And I could not believe what I heard in that moment. Mark, stop blushing. It's okay. It happens. It's
pretty
radio.
Good. Pretty good.
All right. You fired up for the Royals today, by the way?
Woo! Yeah.
All right. Good. I'm glad you're excited. Yeah, between your Royals and listen, I've not shied away from it, but as a diehard New York Mets fan, it's the only team I still have back there. Yesterday, they had to win one of two games against the Atlanta Braves, who have just destroyed the Mets in heartbreaking situations over the years. And what do? They got a doubleheader yesterday, making up for the rain outs they had last week due to the hurricane. And they're trailing game one of this doubleheader. They got to win one of two to get to the playoffs. They're trailing this game 3-0 until the eighth inning. They put a 6th spot on the board in the top of the eighth. What then happens? They bring in their closer for the bottom of the eighth. He blows it. They're down 7-6. In the top of the ninth, they get a 2-run homer. Francisco Lindor puts them up. They win the game. They go to the playoffs. They lost the second game. It didn't matter. The Braves won it. So both teams, the Mets and Braves, got into the postseason here yesterday.
I turned that game on in the 7th inning, and that was a great time to turn it on.
That was a perfect time to put it on there, Mark. Good job by you. So you've got 4 games today to start the Major League Baseball playoffs, all wild card games. You got Detroit at Houston at 1:30. You got the Royals at Baltimore at 3 o'clock. Then the Mets at the Brewers at 4:30. And then the night game, Atlanta at San Diego. So that night game, apparently they were trying to avoid the VP debate, but they obviously could not do that when you've got 4 games stacked up back to back to back to back. So Atlanta at San Diego is going to more or less go up against the VP debate, but it's game 1 of the wild card. It's going to be okay.
And it's a West Coast game, so that kind of makes sense.
Exactly. It's got to be the one that you're looking at and saying that one's got to be at night. So Major League Baseball has way too long of a regular season, but I will give it to them. Their postseason is absolutely outstanding and dramatic, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And maybe we'll get a 2015 repeat if both our teams can catch some fire here, okay? It's going to be great. Meantime, 5 weeks from tonight, you got the VP debate tonight at 8. We've got Politics in a Pint at 6. We'll see many of you out there, American Legion Post 370 in Overland Park. It's going to be a great time. We'll have you home for the VP debate, don't worry. But you got 5 weeks to go. And this aired yesterday on CBS with Major Garrett. Is there a better journalist name? As much as the guy is mainstream media, is there a better journalist name than Major Garrett? He's up in Michigan. And I give him credit for not spinning this report. Instead, he shot it straight with the viewers of CBS, which probably shocked a lot of mainstream media viewers on CBS News. Take a listen to this.
Voters, not one of them was undecided. Wow. Not one. Not one. And headlines come and go, but let me tell you this. Support for former President Trump is real and resilient. I encounter that everywhere I went. And that's something the Harris campaign knows, recognizes. It's a fact in Michigan. For this election, would you say your mind is made up?
Yes.
And that is?
Trump.
Okay. Are you a previous Trump supporter?
The first year he won in 2016, I was not.
Did you vote for Hillary?
I did vote for Hillary,
Okay.
but I cried when she did not win.
Okay. Then what happened?
And then I just felt like he did a good job. I liked the fact that he was not a politician.
You believe you were better off 4 years ago?
Oh, absolutely. Small business owner Andrew Singrati backs Trump, too.
How will you feel if Trump doesn't win, Diane?
Petrified.
Petrified?
Petrified.
Of what may be happening?
All the illegals coming through, they're going to make it up here to Michigan.
What is going on at the border scares me to death. I just hold my breath every day hoping that somebody that I love doesn't get hurt.
Really? You think about it that much?
Yes.
That report from CBS News as Major Garrett stands out to me because, first off, you can tell he's a little surprised. You mean, like, you guys actually care about this illegal immigration stuff? I mean, whoa. They're like, he's surprised by it. And that continues to be something that I think the media and Kamala Harris's campaign is downplaying and not looking at seriously enough. And combine that with the first lady that was interviewed there by CBS at this diner in Michigan. And she talked about how she cried when Hillary lost back in 2016. And now she's about to be a 2-time Donald Trump voter. Those people exist. Those people are out there. It doesn't mean he's got this thing in the bag. But it means that those people absolutely are out there and are going to play a massive role. And that's why the Trump campaign's only message needs to be, do you feel better off today than you did 4 years ago? That's it.